Hello, podcast listener. This is your host with the most, JJ. I'm telling you about a brand new podcast to the JJ Meets World universe. It's called Reviewed with Kevin Kennedy and myself. You're going to love it, and you get a sneak peek of a couple episodes right here. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
Well, Tucker, it's done. Reviewed is now a podcast that people can listen to.
Woo.
So, as if we weren't doing enough, I decided people want to know my opinion on things. And so, along with frequent guest Kevin Kennedy, we are releasing the second podcast in the JJ Meets World universe. Very excited about this. Here's the premise of this podcast. We review stuff. Short and sweet. At first, we were going to just do a book review, and then I'm like, if I have to read a book every single week and then have real opinions on it, that's nuts. Also, we'd have to buy 2 copies of every book,
right,
or make sure that libraries had 2 copies.
Well, and because your co-host is Kevin Kennedy, there's no way you're keeping up with him when it comes to book reading.
No, not
that
even
dude
close.
Crunches through more books than anyone I've ever seen.
Right, and I'm more of an audiobook guy at this point,
right,
if I'm going to be honest.
Right. You like to multitask, so you're always doing other things.
Well, and like I don't just phone it in at my job either, like Kevin does. So it's a lot easier for me. But we recorded our first episode right here in the JJ Meets World studios, and we liked it, and it was fun doing a book. And then we thought, okay, well, let's do more books. It's a daunting task. We said, well, let's throw a movie in there. Well, if we're going to throw a movie, why not we throw experiences in? And so right now, we have got a nice little treasure trove of episodes of Reviewed. Reviewed, period, with Kevin and JJ is the name of the podcast. And we're going to make sure that you can find it in the places that you love to consume your JJ Meets World podcast as well. We already have a Facebook page for all of you who are 55 plus. And there's like a website link that you can get. But for the most part, just ask your kids if you're too old to find it, or send me a message and then I'll send you a direct link. And then you'll be like, this is your Amazon wish list. And I said, oh, whoops, how did that get in there?
Another way, too, is we'll make sure that in the show description notes of this particular episode, this entry here on the JJ Meets World RSS feed, that we will have links there as well. So if you're listening to this right now on whatever device, look at the information. You'll see links to Reviewed.
I wanted to pick 2 episodes of Reviewed to kind of wet everyone's whistle that would be to show kind of how diverse this is. So the first episode you're going to hear is Kevin and I reviewing the Van Gogh exhibit that is currently in the Twin Cities and is going nationwide. So it's an experience where you get to see Van Gogh's imagery projected on these giant 2-story tall screens that encompass you 360 degrees. It is unlike any other art gallery that you've ever been to. We both happened to drive down to the cities and check it out, and so it's well worth the time. And then the second episode is a movie review about The Eyes of Tammy Fay, which is the Michael Showalter biopic about Tammy Fay and Jim Baker, which...
I didn't realize he made that.
Yeah, Michael Showalter
I had
from Stella.
no idea he made that.
Get this, I didn't know either until I'm watching the opening credits and I go, Michael Showalter, you gotta be crapping me. Huh. And so, which of course means that he plays into the humorous aspects of it.
So is he the writer-director?
I don't think he wrote it, but he directed it.
Wow. Okay, cool.
So what is really unique to me about The Eyes of Tammy Fay is I was talking to the manager of the movie theater we were seeing it at, and I said, hey, we're going to go see The Eyes of Tammy Fay. Have you seen this one yet? He goes, I don't think that I can. I don't think that I can see something that tries to make me feel sympathetic for these people.
Sure.
Considering the horrible, horrible things that they did to the folks who followed them. So that was a unique experience. We saw it on the big screen and immediately went and reviewed it. The game plan for review is we are going to continue reviewing everything. Like, for example, we're going to be doing a science experiment where I'm going to melt a king-size Hershey's with almonds and a regular-size Hershey's with almonds and find out how many more almonds are you really getting with something that's king-sized.
Yeah. Can I make a request for a reviewed episode?
Please.
I would love to hear you and Kevin review these things that I've now discovered are referred to by the audience as Limaxes, which is, I went to go see Dune in Minneapolis the other weekend, and I wanted to watch it in the biggest screen I could, and I heard, well, it's going to be on IMAX in the Twin Cities. I got to hit it at that. And my recollection of what an IMAX even is at like the Science Museum where you're going to watch sharks or penguins, and it's all the way
domed,
over. Right.
And it's so big that it's almost like watching a 180 degree screen.
And I thought I was in for something akin to that experience.
Because you drove all the way to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah. And I don't want to just basically do the review now. I'd like to hear what you and Kevin have to say about the Limaxes.
You know what? We'll do Limaxes and Dune.
Yes,
in
please.
2 episodes.
Please do. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of Reviewed is we're going to be accepting some requests.
Kevin will have read the book, and you will have hopefully listened to the audiobook at that point.
If you go back and listen to our episode with Kevin's buddy Murph, who is a doctor, he and Murph went on this like 9-day road trip right after we recorded that podcast.
Oh.
And so a slew of episodes in Reviewed involve Devil's Tower, the Mitchell, South Dakota Corn Palace, Wall Drug. So
was he just calling you up and be like, Jar Jar?
He's like, hey, there's a whole place made out of corn, and let's review it. And I was like, I haven't been there since I was a kid. Great. And so it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to invite guest reviewers on from time to time. But what we really wanted to do was, I was looking for a podcast that's just about reviews. And here's the thing. There are a lot of movie reviews. There's a lot of book reviews. There's video game reviews. There's even things like spray paint reviews. But there's nobody who's reviewing all of them.
Thanks.
Right? There's niche podcasts.
Yeah. So when someone says, what's your niche? Is your niche niches?
No, because even that limits it too much, right? So I would say this, we are the 1% milk of review podcasts.
What does that mean?
It's not quite like thick enough to be like, oh, this is delicious 2% milk. I want to dunk a cookie in here. But it's also not like, well, this is good for my osteoarthritis because it's got some skim milk qualities. This is the middle of the road review podcast.
Pasteurized, but not entirely flavorless.
Right.
Okay.
And see, even there, if you want a great analysis of pasteurization, you have to go back and listen to our JJ Meets World with Zenas Bear, where he talks about representing farmers in a court of law who want to sell their milk directly to the consumer without the pasteurization process, which probably made sense back when we were pooping in buckets and throwing it onto the street.
Right.
And didn't have refrigeration.
Right.
But nowadays, does that make sense? I don't know. I'm told that I've always wanted to drink like actual milk.
Pasteurized is just one of those words. And I'm like, yep, I've heard that plenty of times before. But if you were like, describe it, I'd go, milk is good, healthy.
If you had to constitute what Gordonized would be, because Louis Pasteur made pasteurization, what would Gordonized of something be?
I mean, making a Muppet version of it.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Perfect. I love that.
This thing really got Gordonized.
Okay, so we've got 2 very special episodes of Reviewed. You're going to hear this even before the regular viewers of Reviewed. Our first episode that's out there right now is a review of the life of Gary Paulsen, author of Hatchet. If you are a JJ Meets World listener, you know that I really got into those books during quarantine. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy these. If you want to start following it, as Tucker said, he's going to have some info in the description here. And I guess enjoy these episodes of Reviewed. Kevin and I may even have to review this episode of us kicking off Reviewed.
JJ Gordon and Kevin Kennedy here on Reviewed. JJ, you this past weekend went and saw this Immersive Van Gogh show, and I am really. You showed me some little clips before you went, but I haven't seen it. So tell me about this. First of all, what's it called?
Immersive Van Gogh. That's
okay.
You got it right. So let me paint a picture for you to start with.
No pun intended.
There's an old episode of The Simpsons where they're sitting and watching television and a commercial comes on and it just goes, Gabbo, Gabbo, Gabbo. And they're like, what was that? And they're like, possibly something or someone named Gabbo, but I'm really interested. And so Immersive Van Gogh did this to me. So on social media this last spring, I saw Immersive Van Gogh and it showed a little video of floor to ceiling projections in a warehouse and essentially living paintings. And I'm a huge fan of Vincent Van Gogh to begin with.
Are they projections or are they the television screens?
They're
basically
projections.
Okay, so that means okay, got it. Okay.
So I saw this and I'm like, oh my God. And so I joined their mailer, like, because they said coming to Minneapolis, fall 2021. And I thought, I got to get tickets to this. So when I bought tickets in June, they announced tickets are on sale. They didn't even have a location yet.
Jeez.
And in the COVID world that this took place in, of course, I'm sure they were kind of like, is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And long story short, this is the experience you get when you go to Immersive Van Gogh. They have taken Van Gogh's most famous works and they have done an audio and visual swap. So it's like going to a gallery where you're seeing some of his most famous works. But for example, one of his, but you're immersed. It's 360. It goes completely around. It's on giant screens that are 3 stories tall.
So it's a seamless projection?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Which is just amazing, right?
Okay.
And then there's, in the middle of the room, there'll be random mirrors so that you can see what's going on behind you as well as sitting. And when you walk into the gallery itself, there's about 60 pools of light that are just like a lit up circle. And that's where you would stand or sit. I bought the VIP experience, which I don't think you necessarily need, but it came with a free seat cushion and then a poster and a sunflower. So I would go if all they were doing was essentially showing you a 360-degree version of Van Gogh's work, because I am such a huge fan, and I've been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and I saw Starry Night at the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, and some of his stuff is just enormous and huge, and some are small. And his life, when you learn about Van Gogh's life and how it feeds into the art he creates, it's amazing. So you go in there, and he's got a famous painting of a farmer with those old style haystacks that are kind of bell shaped, right?
Yeah.
And the famous Van Gogh type sun, which is not just a yellow dot, it's got reds and oranges and mixtures. So what this does is it takes the sun and manipulates it so that it actually rises while you're watching it and then sets. And so shadows change in the painting itself, and they've manipulated the textures so that it looks like you're watching a painting that's living at that moment. If there's a scene where if they're eating by candlelight, they've put real flame where the candle's flicker would be. And they've changed enough of it where you're getting a wholly unique experience that expands something beyond what Van Gogh ever could have accomplished. But it's not Disneyfying it, right? It's not like, it's not like all of a sudden they start singing and dancing like, we love farming, we love farming. Of course, like the big crescendo is Starry Night is getting to that point, and that appears piece by piece and layer by layer. The scans that they must have done of the artwork are amazing because you can see the texture. Like it's so thick in areas.
He was famous for building up layers that if you see one of his paintings, if you've never seen one, they're all over the world, but I've seen probably 10 of them live. And if you get close, you can see how thick the paint. He would just glob the paint on the canvas. He
his style of painting isn't just like with a brush. It looks like a little tiny like trowel, like garden trowel, and so he would take like globs of that and essentially smear it on there, and so you get it. So this is an interesting thought. So they also give you a little 12-minute, listen to this podcast before you see the Van Gogh exhibit. And I listened to it on the way there with my wife, and she goes, "Great! I'm sure we're gonna have to sit and listen to this thing while we're in the experience. So now we have to listen to it twice." You don't. It is so. With the exception of an Edith Piaf song, there is. It's just. I mean, it's completely choreographed to the music and the sounds that are playing. Sometimes it's background noise of crickets and. Sometimes it's
So they try to pick music and sound effects that fit to the painting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, so it's like you're immersed in it.
How many rooms are we talking? How many paintings total?
So there are 2 galleries, and what you do is it's like watching a video.
Oh, so you stay in the one room and the paintings change. Okay.
I was under the impression that you move from room to room when I first got there.
Yeah.
But it is almost like seeing a movie. So you go and you sit, and if you find one spot, now the difference is one room is 3 stories tall, the other one is a story tall. So I think that's the one you go if you want to get closer up and see, right into the high def. And then the second gallery, which is the huge one in Minneapolis, is the one you go to if you want to take in the entire experience.
So are they front projected? So I mean, if you walked up to the wall, is your shadow going to be on the wall?
No,
or is it rear projection or
they're
what?
projected from the ceiling down.
So they have to mess with the perspective, the angle.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's wild, and it like you said, it's seamless, right?
Wow.
So it's very unique in what you get, and I think a ticket to it is $45.
Okay.
The presentation itself is around 35 minutes long. But it's worth it, in my opinion, especially if you're someone who appreciates art, if you like Van Gogh. These are 2 things that are great. So something I didn't know about. So when you listen to this little podcast leading into Van Gogh's life, they talk about, when he finally moved to Paris and got to meet Paul Gauguin and how he was so influenced by Gauguin. And then he moves out to Arles, which is in France, and it's his country stuff. And his own mental health starts to deteriorate, and he builds this, or he rents this house and involves all these other artists living there. And then Gauguin comes, then they have a huge fight, and Gauguin goes and lives in a hotel for a week, and then moves back to Paris, and they never talk again. And he slices off his ear.
Off the ear, yeah.
And he had threatened Gauguin with the razor,
That's why
very razor he uses
to
shave off his ear. And then he checks himself into an asylum.
Yeah, which is in northern France or northeastern France.
Yeah. And they said he was incredibly productive during his time in the asylum. Yep. And when you are watching all these pieces, there's a famous piece he has where it looks like a chain gang of people essentially in a small square walking in circles. It looks like a scene out of Shawshank Redemption of people just walking in a little circle. And then a huge perspective of all of these arches. And you're like, this is the stuff that he painted while he was in the asylum. And then he starts using yellows more, and they're thicker as he gets to the end of his life, because they thought, well, he's going further and further down this, these stages of mental, incapacity essentially. And so when you see that and it kind of presents itself in this format, it's very interesting because it's like you're living through his life in that idea. It was awesome. They have a phenomenal gift shop that my wife just was over the moon about afterwards. Very expensive stuff in there, but I saw plenty of people buying it.
How many paintings did they project over the course of the 35 minutes?
I'm guessing you probably see, because there's some where you see multiple in the same shot. I'm guessing you probably see 70, 80 works of art.
Oh, it's a lot then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All said together, there's a lot. One of them including, the picture of him where he's got the candles on. It's a self-portrait he had where he would paint well into the night. And so he'd put candles on his hat so that he could continue to paint at night. And they told a story, and it's the first time I've ever thought about this, but his brother, I think Teddy, lived in Paris, and he was essentially the broker for his brother.
He was an art dealer for him.
And so he would pack up a horse cart in Arles and send all of these paintings to his brother in Paris. So think about this. So first of all, he's painting outside, so bugs are being smashed into the paint. So there's a lot of organic material now that's in the paint that, at this point we'd be like, well, God, what, if this beetle dies and the carcass goes and now there's a hollow spot in the painting. But then think of how many works of his were ruined by being in a horse cart taking a 2-week journey from Arles to Paris in the rain and bumping around on the roads.
He only sold one painting in his lifetime. One, and he sold to his brother. The old saying about Elvis Presley, the smartest career movie ever made was dying.
Right.
And
that's the thing is he dies and then he starts, like, his painting starts selling like crazy.
He died at 37. By the way, if you're really interested, great book on him is Irving Stone's book, Lust for Life, which I read. My wife gave it to me. Oh, it was written, I want to say, in the 50s maybe.
Yeah.
And it's a fictional account of his life, but he did his research, and so obviously he has conversations in there that he wouldn't have been privy to. Great book, and really caused me to really. Here's the interesting thing about him: he only painted for 10 years. Died at 37. He'd thought about becoming a pastor for a while, and that didn't work out. And at 27, he says, "I'm going to become a painter, and I'm going to give myself 10 years." And he drew for 3 years, so 27 to 30. So he only painted for 7 years. And you can really see the evolution of his ability. But I couldn't put that book down. It's 400 pages, and excuse me, my wife
it has
gave it to me.
influenced artists for generations. Now, if you don't want to read a whole book, I'm gonna double down on you.
Okay.
And there's a great movie called At Eternity's Gate, which stars Willem Dafoe as Van Gogh.
Yep.
That is out of this world. So
I've heard that's a great movie.
It's a good movie. I like it a lot.
Where can you get that? At Eternity's Gate? Is it on Amazon?
You can probably get it on Amazon or wherever you consume it. It's not on VHS because it came out in 2018.
Yeah, I know it was fairly recent. He actually kind of looks like him too.
Right. I think the casting was probably pretty easy on that one.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by Van Gogh, and his works of art are just amazing, and I love that surrealist kind of take he has, like how skies are not just the sky is blue. No, the sky is a mixture of 1,000 different colors,
and the sky has texture to it. That was one of his big things, the swirly sort of strokes. I should throw this in here. I don't know if this is still the case. I read this about a while ago that there's a theory about why he went crazy was that they had lead in the paints,
and
he would chew. He would chew on the brush while he was looking at the stuff, and they think that he got lead in his system, and that's why it affected his brain. That's one theory. I don't know if that holds up or not.
There's also a lot of other stuff that goes. Like at that time, like we didn't know how to treat things like syphilis.
Yeah,
There's a lot that could cause a person to have like severe, brain damage from things out there. And I think he was also a tormented man. And I think we see that in his art.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny to see something as early as the Potato Eaters all the way up to Starry Night, and you can see the evolution of his painting. And a lot of painters, they're the same from the beginning to the end. But somebody like Picasso, who changed so much over, 50, 60 years of painting. But in that 7 years of painting for Van Gogh, you really just see this change in him.
I have talked to a dozen people now who've seen it in the Twin Cities. Okay, so there's the Minneapolis, Chicago, I think, has one right now, and there might be an international one, and it's going across the world.
So they have multiple versions of it going everywhere?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
But nobody has said anything less than like, I really had an amazing, like, transformative experience. The only person who's reviewed it poorly that I've seen so far is the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, gave it a real lackluster review. And I'll also tell you this too. I know plenty of people who said, I went to it and I loved it, and then I went again and I had imbibed some substances, and then it's like going to see a laser show back in the 70s,
Yeah, like, the paintings are talking to me.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We also had a very unique experience while we were there, my wife Jill and I. So we had gotten the tip that don't stay in the first gallery, just go straight to the second gallery.
The second gallery is the big one?
The big one. So we went in there, and like I said, I bought VIP tickets, so they brought us to the front of all these waiting lines, and I felt really embarrassed.
Let me ask this: was there a limit to how many people could be in the gallery at a time?
You could easily have 200 people in there.
And was there that many in there when you were in there?
Not really. So I bought tickets for right away in the morning because I didn't want to experience it.
One of those deals where they let people in every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes or something like that.
So they make you wait. So essentially, like, you pick a ticket for every showing, but you could stay in there and watch it 5-6 times if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Which is nice, but they don't really explain. Even when it was done and the credits rolled, everyone was sort of like, do we leave? Do I go now?
Were people coming in midway through the thing too? It wasn't like
people were switching back and forth from the galleries quite a bit. But so we get let in there, and there's like a pre-show that you can watch that it's just like our little pieces of his work, and then there's the main show, some credits afterwards, and go again. So these pools of light, right? So it's like a little circle of light, and then there's blank space on either side of it, and then there's another pool, and so this couple brought in their little girl and then a baby, and the baby was sitting with the mom, and all of a sudden like crawls away, like it's that slap crawl, the like the slap crawl. So this baby does this slap crawl away from the mom and gets like probably like 25 feet away before the mom can like get up to get it. But the baby stops, plants itself firmly, and then just looks up and is taking in this moment. And it's like when Edith Piaf is going, param, param. And this kid looks up, and the brightness of the painting suddenly shows. It's coming out from darkness. And I was like, that kid is going to remember this for the rest of their life. Like, this is just, it's like when I watched Jurassic Park for the first time and I saw Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Like, that's a
It was really amazing. And I highly recommend it. I thought I had a really good time at it. So did Jill.
Who would be the people? Okay, so if you were to recommend this to people, what people would it be good for non-art aficionados?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So I would so I'd recommend this to you. Okay. I would recommend this to, like if you're in the Twin Cities and you're looking for something to do, just like how I tell you to go see the exhibit about the Titanic, this is worthwhile. Even if you know nothing about Van Gogh, this might be the perfect way to get yourself introduced into what he does.
Where is it in Minneapolis?
It's in Northeast.
Northeast, oh, okay.
And so they've got valet parking, and you could tell that a lot of people were like, I'm going to choose valet park.
Because they didn't quite know where they were.
Right. Yeah. I don't know where it's at, like in the Chicago area, but
is it still going on in Minneapolis?
It is, and I think it goes through the end of October. It's so good, Kevin, that I think if you get the chance,
I really want to see it.
Go see it.
Yeah,
it is well worth your time. And they gave you lanyards, and I bought tickets to the last weekend in September, and then I was like, oh no, I got to judge a barbecue competition. So I switched them to be the weekend earlier, and I was able to give those tickets I had for the end of the weekend to a friend of mine, and I said, just tell me how it is afterwards. That's all I want from you. Tell me how it is. And so
you didn't give them to me, is what you didn't do.
I didn't do that.
Okay.
No, because you're too busy. You're too busy
with
your life.
No, that's fine. I thought we were friends, but I guess that's not the case anymore.
He just sent me a text, and it was one word, and it was wow.
Really?
And I was like, this is not a guy.
My wife is a huge Van Gogh fan. I'm actually willing to pay that kind of money to go see it.
You should. You absolutely should. This would be a really great, like, honestly, if you were just going to head down to the cities and you said, I'm going to go to some bookstores, I'm going to eat somewhere, I'm going to visit some friends, boom, do the Van Gogh exhibit. Because it doesn't take up your whole day.
How long were you in there for?
We stayed through a session and a half, essentially. So, and we were there a little bit early. So we were probably there, all said and done, hour and 10 minutes.
Really? Okay.
And I think if we hadn't had something planned for later that afternoon, I think we would have stuck around and watched it, like 2 full cycles.
Wow. And you said each cycle's 35 minutes?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Wow. Now this review makes me very excited about seeing this. Now I really want to see this.
Good. Well, there you go. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Immersive Van Gogh. Reviewed. On this episode of Reviewed, we are going to be talking about the 2021 film The Eyes of Tammy Fay, directed by Michael Showalter, starring Jessica Chastain in a role that, quite frankly, you don't recognize her in.
No, I for the longest time I couldn't. I mean, I know her. I haven't seen a ton of movies of her, but you're looking at it going, I know what she looks like.
Right, and certainly not this.
No.
All right, so Kevin Kenny, let's talk about this to begin with. How you know quite a bit about the Bakers because you lived this, right? This was on the television and in the papers when you would have been old enough to really remember the height of televangelism.
Yeah, I remember this all happening. I was not the 80s were definitely the age of the televangelist. So Here's what I remember about Tammy Faye. Mascara running down her face.
Yeah. That's the thing that I remember. And in fact, they have a clip from Saturday Night Live in this where I remember Jan Hooks playing her.
Yeah.
And that was the big thing, right? Is that she just had the giant mascara coming down her face.
Yeah. And they, in the movie right off the bat, they talk about how she had permanent lip liner and permanent eyeliner, so she actually got it tattooed. I heard of people doing that, getting it tattooed on, obviously later in her life. And she says that's her signature look, which it definitely became that. I don't remember her at all in the 70s. I just remember, I guess I was aware of the show in the 80s. I mean, I graduated high school in the 80s, so I was aware of the show, especially when cable started. But of course, the scandal. The scandal
was massive.
The scandal was huge.
So this biopic, The Eyes of Tammy Fay, follows Tammy Fay, and of course then includes a huge chunk about Jim Baker, who becomes her husband in the movie and is the one who's really accused of crime in the giant scandal. But you get all these people who kind of surround it too, and I want to start by saying, oh my good gravy, the portrayal of Jerry Falwell in this is amazing.
Yeah.
It's Vincent D'Onofrio, and this is just amazing. It is so good, and it's so cold.
Oh yeah.
You know, like the way they portray Tammy in this is that she's very warm and welcoming, and she wants to be everybody's friend, and he is the exact opposite.
Oh yeah.
This cold, uncaring, portrayed as man.
Yeah, and he double-crossed him. When they signed over the PTL Ministries to hopefully save it, he turned around and basically said they were
screwed him.
Yeah, he screwed him. It was amazing, and they do that really well in the movie too.
So Kevin and I just got out of this movie that we're reviewing for you right now, and the first thing, so right off the bat, it says like. It shows this little piece where she's an adult and she's having her makeup redone, as Kevin was saying, and then it cuts back to like 1954, International Falls, Minnesota.
Yeah.
And Kevin goes, "What? She's from Minnesota?" Be like, sure enough. And then,
I guess I knew that, but I'd completely forgotten that.
And they lean hard into a Minnesota kind of accent in this.
Especially
she
near
really
the end.
gives it.
Yeah. I always the Minnesota accent always bugs me a little bit because it seems a little bit over the top.
And hers, I think that was one of the big things, is it was way over the top.
Yeah. But I'd forgotten that she's from Minnesota and has a very much a. You just assume she's from down south because the whole PTL was down south and all that stuff, and they met at a Bible college in Minneapolis. So I don't know where he's from now that I think about it.
If I'm going to take this movie to task for one thing, it's Andrew Garfield may sort of look like Jim Baker, but my big problem is that like he never ages, right? Like So from the time you meet Jim Baker until even when the very last scene that you see him in, he doesn't look like he's aged at all.
No, they did his hair a teeny bit. Whereas they put prosthetics on Jessica Chastain's face for most of the movie.
Pretty much from the get-go, because she kind of has these like bigger cheekbones.
Yeah, these puffier cheeks and stuff like that. I think near the end, they really did a good job of making her look like Tammy Fay. Especially the last half hour is amazing.
I'm just pulling up the IMDb page here, because I also think one thing that you want to say is the woman who portrayed her mother, Cherry Jones, was amazing.
She was great.
Because you get this feeling at the very beginning that Tammy Fay is not loved.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons she seeks out love from Jesus. Because
her mom
she's not loved at home.
She was I don't know if she was a bastard child. Did they say her mom divorced?
Her mom
the guy?
was divorced.
So they viewed her as not holy to be in the church and stuff. Like they wouldn't let her go to the church. I didn't know any of that stuff, which was interesting. The first half of the movie, she seemed too perky, and peppy and stuff like that, which seemed a little false to me. But boy, that last hour, just Jessica Chastain just crushed it.
So if you break this movie into thirds, I think the beginning of the last third, which starts with a montage, that is her singing this like disco hit, while
Yeah.
while her son or her husband Jim is saying like give us your gold essentially. And that is where I think the movie actually took a turn and changed its pacing, and I was fully engrossed.
Me too.
I'm right off the bat, I enjoyed this movie, and I got something out of it which I thought was unique. I was chatting with the theater manager before you got there, and I said I'm going to see The Eyes of Tammy Fay, and he goes, I have a hard time buying a ticket to that because I think that they are such grotesque,
grifters,
awful people that I have a hard time going to a movie that's going to try and make me feel sympathy for her. And it's funny because I thought the same thing. Like, how are you going to make this a character that I can A, relate to, or B, want to, have a happy ending in the long and short of it. And I think they did a pretty decent job in this movie. It's directed by Michael Showalter, who is one of my favorite comedians. He was in Stella, and he did Wet Hot American Summer. He was with that group, and he's been around for a long time. His last movie that was a major success was called The Big Sick. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. It was an Amazon movie. And he did another one with Sally Fields called My Name is Doris, about a woman who is well past the age of dating younger men, but she falls in love with a guy. And so he's always got this funny little quirk. And there's a couple times in this movie that they clearly played it for a laugh. Yeah. And they had some humor. But this is a drama. By no means should you assume anything else. This is a drama. This movie is a drama.
There were times when you could tell he was almost making fun of them as caricatures. But yeah, it's a drama. It really is. I go back and forth. My father-in-law was a minister, and he just couldn't stomach grifters like this, these televangelists. He just, that drove him crazy. And I agree with him. I mean, I grew up, and you'd see these people on TV just asking for money, and it really bugged me, and they were sort of the epitome of that in the 80s with these here's an interesting thing. I think it was 99 maybe, Jim Bakker came out with a book. I think it was right when he got out of jail, called I Was Wrong. And I was working actually at the time at the VA in Minnesota with my mother-in-law. I got her a job there, and she was working there. And a woman from her church had read the book and given it to her, and she read it. And I saw her reading. I'm like, why are you reading that? And she goes, actually, it's kind of interesting. And I read everything, so I grabbed the book and read it, and I was fascinated by it, actually. And he comes clean on everything. He doesn't, he said, this is that. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And he kind of goes through the whole Jerry Falwell story, which was really interesting, because Jerry Falwell's always made my skin crawl. I always felt like I met him once. I never told you that.
What? You met Jerry Falwell?
I met him. Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. Okay, so in 87, Jerry Falwell came and spoke at Notre Dame when I was in college.
Really?
And a guy across the hall from me said, Jerry Falwell's coming here. And he said, should we go? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting. So we went and spoke. He spoke in Washington Hall. And he came out, and there were people chanting and screaming and stuff. But he gave his speech. I don't even remember what it was about, but he gave his speech. And it just so happens we were in the balcony, and we went off the side of the balcony to go down. But the stairwell was also sort of the way they took him off stage and out the door to the thing. And so we actually met on the stairwell going out of the building. And it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, the dude's standing right there. And he was clever. He's very much like a politician, because there were people that were following. They wanted to kind of get in his grill. And the guy I was with said, hey, Mr. Falwell. And he goes, hey, son, how you doing? Where are you from? And shook his hand, and then shook my hand. And I was like, I'm from Minnesota. And it was one of these surreal moments. And then his handlers just hustled him off to a car, and he was gone. I mean, so I shook his hand, and it was a weird, not a guy that I would ever aspire to meet or to talk to, but very much the sort of politician feel. Mm-hmm. The fake sort of politician.
Well, I mean, he's one of the most famous people on the planet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Reminds me of, there's an Onion article where it's like, area man surprised to hear So, I'm surprised they didn't include that moment in the movie. I list where he meets Kevin Kennedy, where Jerry Falwell.
Oh yeah, I'm surprised. It would have been a great. I will say though, I really enjoyed the book. It felt genuine that Jim Bakker was like, I screwed up. He was telling how they would sell these memberships, and people would buy 3, 4, 5 of them, and all this stuff. And he felt very guilty and repentant and the whole deal. And so I thought, well, if you're a Christian, you believe that people can ask for forgiveness and are giving forgiveness and all that stuff. So it seemed very real. Then I saw something like a week ago that he's an anti-vaxxer. So that really, I hadn't heard of him in years.
He seems like the kind of guy who still would like to get back into ministry.
Yeah.
And probably for the wrong even if he thinks that's his calling, he's like, yeah, but that's when my life was good.
Yeah.
You're like, maybe you should double think this thing.
Yeah.
To me, this movie is just, could you imagine seeing this if you didn't know the story to begin with? Like, I'm trying to think of the younger generations who know nothing about Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker watching this and finding out that this is in fact a true story. Mm-hmm. There were some moments in this thing where I started to think about, like, okay, so they actually had albums and books, and
she was like a big time seller of albums too,
right? And
she had this locked in audience that would buy, so her albums would sell hundreds of thousands of copies.
So it wasn't just people who were giving pledges; it was people who were also buying their merchandise. As well.
Yeah, that was a big part of it.
In the movie, they talk about kind of building this theme park, more or less, and they give this really the developer that they kind of swoon into working with them has a funny line where he goes, my wife and I used to go to Knott's Berry Farm every summer, and the preserves kept getting worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because they didn't use the same people who had the care from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so that's what he's trying to essentially message to them, is that everything that they are trying to do to build bigger and bigger and bigger is making their church worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
This movie also deals a lot with homosexuality.
Surprisingly so. And I knew that she believed that the LGBT community, was worthy of respect and stuff like that. But I guess I didn't. I was surprised that she brought an AIDS guy onto the show and things like that. I mean, which was very controversial in the 80s. I mean, especially with the conservative, biblical, evangelical movement.
And that plays into a big thing because Jerry Falwell is, even in the trailer for this movie, he talks about being against the homosexual agenda.
Yeah.
And how she kind of does her own thing. This movie doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of something I thought that they should have, which is the fact that, like, she takes her place at the table. So there's literally a scene where she's carrying a baby and it's all the men talking, and she forces her way onto this table because she wanted to be there. She wanted to help, like, influence this way to communicate and through God. I mean, I don't know, from the portrayal in this, they clearly show that she does have a devotion to God, and she thought that she was doing good.
I absolutely believe that to be true, and here's why. A little side note on that scene. It's a scene where he was on Pat Robertson's CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, and I didn't realize it was the 700 Club was Jim Bakker's baby.
Yeah,
it was his baby. And then
he called it a Tonight Show with Jesus.
Yeah. And Tonight Show with Jesus. And then Pat Robertson just basically took that over from him too, and that's still going today. Which, if you ever turn that on, it's like, oh my gosh, he's still alive.
It also airs like at an ungodly late time of day, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I'll be flipping channels and be on. I'm like, okay, and they're still asking for money, which is just unseemly to me in a lot of ways.
I also want to be the person who says this too. It drives me nuts that there are people out there who prey on folks who are sad, lonely, devoted to their religion, and are getting them to send money and money and money and money and asking to be put into their wills.
Yeah.
And to me, they are, there's nothing different between someone who's telling you about the ShamWow or the Ronco food dehydrator and televangelism.
Yeah.
But they found it was like you can only talk to so many parishioners in one church, but once you use the magic of television and you get that phone bank going.
Yeah. The moment I I shouldn't say I turned the corner, but the moment that Tammy Fay was humanized for me was in the 2000s, and I want to say it was on VH1 when it was one of those deals where they put a bunch of people in the Vanilla Ice was in there.
It was like a celebrity house.
Yeah, celebrity house, yeah, something like that. And I remember Ron Jeremy, the porn star, was on and I absolutely found the show compelling. And Tammy Fay was one of them. And they ended up becoming friends over the course of this show. And she didn't want anything to do with that world that he was from. But he absolutely believed in her First Amendment ability to say what she wanted and stuff like that. And they became this weird friendship that built out of that time together. And she would say, I really pray for him and stuff like that. So I think that there was some genuineness about her belief system. I don't think she was, just, I mean, did it become a grift? Absolutely.
But this movie kind of makes you question, like, did she know what was going on? And, if she didn't realize, she's incredibly ignorant, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, where does this money all come from? Versus, on the other hand, you think to yourself, like, okay, so if she did know, Jim's the one who ultimately took the fall in a criminal aspect, but she fell from grace as well.
Absolutely. I mean, by the end, she's living in this cheap apartment somewhere in California that you just kind of go, wow, how the mighty have fallen, So I think it's built a little bit to give you to find some empathy for. They don't mention that she remarried. I remember she remarried, and she remarried somebody that was fairly wealthy, I think. So I don't think she died, a pauper or anything like that. It was a guy that somehow was involved in the ministry. On the
like
board
in the
or something
PTL
like that.
ministry?
Yeah, something like that. Or he was. I forget all the details on that, but I read about that.
Like any good biopic, it makes me want to go and like hit up her Wikipedia page, right, and find out like what the last parts of her life were like. She passed in 2007.
I think she had cancer.
Cancer?
I think so. Yeah, I remember when she passed. I mean, the thing is, she became a joke because of the makeup and sort of the naivete that and that was really well portrayed in the movie. I thought that Jessica Chastain's great. She really is in this movie.
This movie is all about seeking love.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what the core of this movie is. She's seeking love from Jesus. She's seeking love from her husband. She's seeking love from people who tell her that she has value. She's seeking love from her mother.
Yeah.
Seeking love is the core of what Tammy
really
Fay is like.
I mean, you kind of see the not the dissolution, but they're drifting in their marriage, and she doesn't want that to happen. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly how it happened, but I get the feeling that it kind of did.
Also, like Jim Baker is a complete and total like ass hat.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Did he truly believe at the beginning? Probably. I think that's like anything else. You get caught up in the grift and you don't.
Some of the things he forces her to do to like repent.
Yeah.
And then you find out that he's also like this total incomplete douchebag on the other side. And you go like, come on, man.
He makes her apologize, repent, ask for forgiveness on air, knowing that the phones will light up and people will give donations. And when you see that happen, you're like, oh, that's why.
And he learns very early on in their career that like when she announces that she's going to have a baby on the show, the phones start ringing. Yeah. So he starts using pieces of his personal life to get the phones to ring. And that's sort of like his Achilles heel as he goes on, because you almost sort of want him to like manufacture these things. It's one of those guys who's like, well, God, like if Tammy Faye's mother died, we could, get a lot of money by having the funeral live on air.
To the birth of his son because he's on the air, but he announces the birth of his son on the air, and he shows up at the hospital saying, yes, this is the most donations we've ever gotten in one day because of, this. And it's like, okay.
This movie also is a love letter to Diet Coke, a love letter to sort of the look of the like late 70s, early 80s, up until the 90s. One of these movies must be really difficult to make because you've got to get the vehicles and the clothing.
Yeah.
This also did a phenomenal job showing You know, like they would cut to like this ultra high def, which is what cameras film in today, but then show you what it looked like when it was on television during that era.
Especially the stuff in the 60s, yeah.
Right. I thought that was a really nice choice for them.
Yeah. What was the best line I put? She's prescribed pills after the birth of their son.
Yeah, she's taking Ativan.
Ativan. And so she's taking that, and then she hears this thing that maybe her husband's cheated on her, and she poo-poos it, and then she ends up almost overdosing on it and stuff like that. And then there's this whole sequence where they're going to get her, you know, she goes, I'm not addicted to drugs. I'm addicted to Diet Coke. And I leaned over and said, that is the line in the movie. Yeah.
Okay, so let's tell them. Do you recommend the Eyes of Tammy Fay?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always a sucker for a biopic that sort of also, I mean, I think it gives a good view of what the 80s were like and this sort of grift of televangelism. It's not a complete bashing of televangelism, which is still huge today. Guys like Joel Osteen and people like that. And also it kind of deals with a little bit with the prosperity gospel, which is the new televangelism, you know, that God wants you to be rich and stuff like that. And it takes a couple swings at that. I would definitely recommend it. I thought it was very interesting. It kind of filled in some gaps in my knowledge from the 80s and all that stuff that was going on. So, yeah.
This is, you know, there's some unique angles that were taken with this movie. Like, this movie relies on Jessica Chastain. There's maybe like 3 minutes total where she is not in the frame somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that she does a pretty good job because at no point did I ever think I'm looking at Jessica Chastain.
No.
And not just the prosthetics, but she really embodied that like idea of this naive Minnesota woman who just wanted to spread some gospel.
Yeah.
So, you know, to me, I would recommend this to anyone who has an interest in it. Mm-hmm. I think if you regularly watch the 700 Club, something like that, this is not your cup of tea. This is, you know, those relatives are not going to like this movie because it doesn't show a very flattering light on the people who are behind.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, this is partially fictionalized because we weren't all in the room where it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think pretty accurately fictionalized because we know most of the story. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't know all of the relationship with her mother and some of that stuff, obviously. But
it made me feel bad. It made me feel bad that like I used to make fun of Tammy Faye without knowing anything about her.
Which is usually the case. Mm-hmm. You know, it humanized her in a lot of ways, which, you know, I mean, you can make fun of the sort of the circus clown makeup and stuff like that, which is a lot of people did. And, you know, I remember Sam Kinison at the time, which there's a brief little clip of him, like 2 seconds in the movie. But I remember he had a joke that he did because he used to be a reverend, you know, and he made fun of Jim and Tammy Faye. He talked about how he hated, you know, feed the poor, no, we don't want anything to do with that. God wants us to have a Ferris wheel. I remember that joke and laughing at it. And so him being one of those people that used to be inside the sort of the ministry business saw the grift back then. And I think that people were aware also, but it's one of those things you just look at and you go, how do people fall for this? You know, and a lot of people do. I mean, a lot of people feel like that's speaking to them, and I don't know.
Yeah, so if you fell for listening to this podcast, we only have one thing to tell you. The Eyes of Tammy Faye Baker, reviewed. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. You should see the kind of stuff that Kevin has on me that's forcing me to do another podcast with him. It's just unlikable.